I sailed the demo 18 once, and then I sailed a race of 27 in Chicago Mackinac, which was very nice. That was an easy race with not too much wind. We got overtaken by a lot of Jays in very light winds at the start, and then we overtook them back just before the finish in 20 knots of wind. And we were the boat seemed to be having most fun by a long, long way. And then I've just been on a 24 recently for the first time in literally the conditions you dream about in Croatia, in maximum 15 knots. So the prospect of heading out with very little seascape experience into 30 knots with potential 40-knot gusts is an interesting one. I can't say I'm overly settled and comfortable with the idea, and I guess there's a lot of other people who maybe just don't have that much, like me, that much time with that boat, and I think, you know, it's important to know the limits of your vessel and to know your personal limits as well. And yeah, although I know I can push myself quite hard, I don't really know how the boat is going to respond in this sort of wind. It's a big uncertainty, but I guess we all like discovering new things and having some challenges. But it's where you draw that line, and that's, I guess, what we're going to be. That's the big question to ask today, and we'll find out a bit later whether the actual official Silver Rudder is going ahead or not. I think at the briefing at 5 o'clock. And yeah, in the meantime, maybe we can just talk a bit about solo sailing.
Well, you should tell people what you usually sail, and that's a Class 40, and actually he's the leading guy in the Class 40 World Championship, and you were winning last year as well, if I remember right, or were you second?
No, we won last year, yeah, so...
and he's about to win this year as well, I hope. So, thumbs pressed. Phil is the guy who you have to put all your money on if it's really rough. And even if everything breaks, he will still survive, and he will still get to the finish line and eventually become third overall.
His boats typically look really shit.
But sailing at Class 40 and having some previous experience on the 24, 27 and 18, what goes through your mind when you have a weather forecast like this in your Class 40 and you're coastal racing and not offshore?
Well, funnily enough, a lot of comfort from being offshore is the fact that you're nowhere near land. That can sometimes be a help, because it can be very dangerous actually when you're have a lee shore and you have a lot of wind, and you only have so much time for rectifying a problem, and you know, things take a lot of planning in offshore racing, and you've always got to have a plan B up your sleeve. So I would say that the difference between the boats is quite extreme as well. So a Class 40 has a lot of stability, a lot of power. You can reef the boat very heavily. It actually has 4 reefs, and if you use the 4th reef, the boat doesn't actually move. It's basically like having a handkerchief for the top. And I had to actually use that 4th reef once crossing the Atlantic 2 years ago when I did the Transat. Not because it was really windy, but because my main ripped in half just below the 4th reef, which is the worst place it can happen, because you can't just take 3 reefs or 2 reefs and have a useful sail. Yeah, I mean, we have 8 sails on the Class 40, so it has quite a few gears. You've got a Genoa, you've got a staysail, which is so Genoa's 50 meters squared, J2 32 meters squared, and then you've got a storm jib, which is 9 meters squared. So it's again something you never really want to use, because you're not going to be going probably backwards as fast as you would be going forwards when you use it. But you know, they're boats which are inherently very robust, and yeah, they're ones that you feel very comfortable on. And yeah, it's crazy how much the Class 40 has developed over 12 years now, because I did the first racing Class 40s, the Route de Rhum, in 2006. I actually got on I rented the 4th Class 40 ever built, and I had to do a 1,000-mile qualifying passage for the Route de Rhum. And the boat basically just started breaking up halfway through the Class 40, halfway through the passage, the 1,000-mile passage. So the deck started ripping away from the the bow of the boat, and then all the secondary structure in the boat started basically cracking off from the hull, and the guys from structure, the pogo yards, actually spent a week laminating inside the boat to repair the boat before the route to run. So now the boats are much stiffer. They're proper thoroughbred machines, and I mean they're relentless. Just they really punish you. Like when you're slamming into a sea, the noise down below is deafening, but the motion is also horrific. I mean, you just in a state where you regularly it's just impossible to sleep. So that's when you have to think about. Really, solo sailing is very much about looking ahead, managing your time with respect to the weather conditions that are arriving, and planning when you're going to shift gears and making sure you change sails at the right time, and try to avoid heading into the middle of storms where feasible. Sometimes you don't have an option.
So tell me, what was your worst experience you ever had offshore? Was it the Transat, where everything was?
Actually, well, I think the worst experience, the most scary experience I've ever had was qualifying for the mini Transat, and you had to do a passage going from a loop between Ile de Ré and Koningbeg light vessel off southeast Ireland. So you had to go past Land's End, and I ended up going on a pretty lively forecast. I'd taken a week off work, and I felt like this was the only week I really had to do it. The forecast was deteriorating a little bit, but it was forecasting force 7. And when I got north of Land's End, it was force 10. It was like gusting up to 50 knots. And yeah, the waves were pretty scary. They weren't scary at night because I couldn't see them. But the next morning when it started getting light, then I realised that I wasn't going to get round probably in these conditions. So I actually decided to go to Wales, go back to find shelter in ports in Milford Haven, and it was because I was having problems with my batteries. But it was going to be inherently risky because I was going to go near land, and on the way into Wales, probably about 5-10 miles off the coast, I got picked up by a very large wave, thrown on my side on the boat, and actually rolled completely upside down by a breaking wave. I was on deck at the time, so yeah, obviously the only thing I could do was hold my breath and hang on very tight. And yeah, it's just one of those moments where you don't really have time to be scared. You're more just okay, we're going swimming, so let's deal with this. And amazingly, when the boat came up about 20-25 seconds later, the mast was still there, and I'd never actually spoken to anyone who'd been in that situation and kept the mast. But it was partly because I only had a storm jib up 3 reefs in the main, so there wasn't much resistance. And yeah, I realised if I'd lost the rig, then things would have been very, very complicated because I wasn't far from the coast. We're in 40 knots of wind, solid still. And even when I got into Milford Haven Sound, and this is an interesting lesson, I got into Milford Haven Sound, I was trying to pick up a buoy and go upwind to the buoy, and I found I couldn't actually make any headway against the wind. The wind was so strong that I was just even tacking as close as I could to the wind. There was too much drag. And my VNG was 0, if not slightly negative, which sounds a bit like what we might have in this race, going around the north side of the island if we go anti-clockwise.
Was that on the 419? On the mini?
Yeah, that was exactly 419. Yeah.
419,
yeah. Because are you the owner?
Yeah, no, a friend of mine.
Oh, he's a friend of mine. Yeah. So that's 419. My mini's just been bought by a guy that's actually here.
He's here, yeah. It's Henley. Well, I'll introduce you a little bit.
Yeah, okay, great.
So how did you make it to the buoy?
Well, I ended up drifting down the sound towards the shore, and I thought it was kind of game over, really. And fortunately, there was a fishing trawler coming up the sound, so I did sort of a huge emergency wave to him, got his attention, and he realised I was in strife. Gave me a tow line, and he towed me all the way up the sound. By this stage, I'd blown pretty much all the way down the sound. He gave me a tow line, and we got up to near the buoy, the buoy I wanted to pick up, and the tow line broke just at that point. You know, I had visions of myself just, you know, being nicely tied up in a few minutes, and all this horror film would suddenly be over. And then the same thing happened. The rope broke, and the boat just started getting blown all the way down the sand again. And by the time he came to pick me up, I was a good mile away from the buoy, and we had to go through the whole procedure again. And it just shows how powerful the wind is. And that was even in flat water, where you don't really have much time to respond because. And I think, looking back, I think even if I'd anchored, it wouldn't really have done much. I don't think the anchor probably would have held. But that was probably the only thing you can do in that situation.
Can you do any more to encourage people to take the race tomorrow? It sounds like...
Yeah, the positive thing I can say is it might be a little bit less windy than what it was then.
So you're going to take the 24 tomorrow?
I don't know yet, actually.
Anders, will you give him the 24? If he says yes?
Well, I'd have to. But I've seen the boats after he's done with them. Including my Mini after the Mini Fastnet. I had to do some serious fixing of my water ballast tanks because we were stacking at the end of the race. Remember that?
No, I don't actually. What was
we
that?
were finishing on the fighting for the third place with the Belgian guy, the E-cover.
Yeah, with Peter Lawrence.
Peter Lawrenson. So we're catching up, and then he gets super competitive in these kind of conditions. And of course, it was stacking upwind, and the wind was picking up to 25, 30 knots gusts. And on a Mini, that means it's a huge difference whether your weight is on the right side or not. So inside the Mini, it's very limited space, and you have containers with everything stacked. So typically, a tack on a Mini is a process that takes you 4 to 5 minutes. You stack everything carefully. Because the water ballast tanks are made out of 200 gram carbon fiber, that's 0.2 millimeter over a foam. So you do it carefully, and then you have a canting keel, you have all the other stuff. So with Phil, this text took, so he was hiking, and then we were tacking, so he went in for like 20 seconds. And coming out like, okay, ready. And the consequence of that was that when I checked the boat out, we came third on that. I mean, we beat the guy, so he got on the podium. So
Which is what matters.
Exactly.
If we'd taken longer on the stacking, we might not have beaten him.
Completely.
Yeah, to trash the boat to...
The boat inside was like a crazy person would go in and just like smash it. So yeah, that's sort of like a long answer to this question. Yeah.
Yeah, so I gather this is not being sold, this boat though, so it could be left at the bottom of the ocean somewhere.
And it's a Beneteau, so it's much more robust.
It's indestructible.
You know, somehow they have to increase sales numbers with Beneteau now, so that's a good way. No, but seriously, I mean, you don't know the boat too much, you don't know the course. It's very windy, it's gusty, it's coastal.
Yeah.
Would you still go?
I'm very hesitant at the moment, unless the forecast settles a little bit, I have to say, because there's a lot of dangers in terms of sandbanks, buoys, rocks, islands. So it's tricky waters. So I think it's not a case of just following a channel and following buoys, is it? It's a case where you've actually got to be very aware of a lot of shallows around you. But I think the worst thing is really having that danger of being in some very gusty conditions with a lee shore. That's something I think is probably offers the highest level of risk. And yeah, currently I don't think I would probably be comfortable to leave because I don't know the boat that well. But I think generally if you've got 35, 40 knot gusts, you can't really sail in that. It's more trying to hold position and actually keep the boat moving forward, which can be quite difficult, particularly even reaching. You can end up just with big gusts approaching the boat. You can still move forward, I suppose, but it can take quite a while. And whether we can actually go upwind and make more than a few knots VNG on the north coast, that's a big question mark as well. So yes, I think it's possible to get round, but I think there's quite a lot of risk in doing so. There's a sort of a risk to oneself, and then there's also the risk of damaging the boat. And that's always things you've got to take into consideration. How much do you really want to finish the race? Is it going to be a massive victory? Do you feel like you would be a hero if you finish the race? Or will people just look at you as a complete masochist? I don't know, maybe you want to do it more as a personal challenge, because it looks like it's not going to be much of a race. It's going to be
survival.
A question of challenge and survival. And so it's a slightly different dimension to what probably a lot of people came here for.
Yeah. I've talked to many offshore pros, and they say that at 30 knots the fun ends. At 40 knots, they really call it shitty. I mean, they really prepare for the worst when it hit the clock hits 40.
Yeah.
Is this is it the same with you, or are you a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean,
stressed.
In 40 knots, you're really on storm sails. In more than that, and you can't really hold a standard size jib in more than, it's very difficult in more than 30 knots. And I think in small boats you kind of forget just how windy even 25 knots is. Going upwind in a Mini in 25 knots, and this is in a Mini 21 foot long, very powerful ocean going machine, you're basically almost in survival mode where it feels, every wave you really feel it. You're just trying to hang on to the boat and keep it moving forward well, and yeah, the motion is incredibly uncomfortable. In a small boat. I think in a 27 it will be different. I think in a 27 the boats can probably take. You probably get to about 30 knots, and then it really turns into hell, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think 27s are a little bit better than Minis going upwards. So I think 27s, as you said, I think the moment you touch 40,
yeah,
all the fun is gone. 35, it's probably not there anymore.
I don't think there's much. I don't think, as Jochen said, there's not actually much fun over 30.
30 knots, I agree.
You're really trying to.
I think on a 27 you can still, if everything works and you have good crew and you don't break stuff, you can still do it. On a 24, I don't think you can do it. To make headway.
It's a light boat as well.
That's the problem, and you have no backstay.
You get blown sideways a lot in a light boat. You don't have a backstay, so you find it very difficult to really bend the mast to depower.
I think the main you could, but you need a really small jib very soon.
Yeah,
Probably
exactly.
Everything over 25 knots. I would ask one of the 18 guys if they borrow you their jib. No, I'm not kidding.
And you have to.
We have a storm jib
later.
Oh,
when you give it back
for the 18. Oh yeah.
Oh, for the 18. That might be a bit small. But yeah.
Well, what are the 3 things you would never leave at home when you go offshore racing? You have 3 favorite things to head towards, your iPod, whatever. Some funny stuff from your wife.
I always take a hammer with me. Believe it or not, if you need a useful tool.
Ballast tank is
Yeah, exactly. Now I'm hearing it for the first time.
It's to wake him up, actually. He sleeps too long. Go for the kneecaps.
So what's the hammer for?
I find it the most useful tool on the boat, actually. I like to call it a persuader.
So
if you can't get a pin out, or something, you need to force something out, or in, yes, then a hammer's very useful. So never leave home without it.
Big fishes.
Knocking out big fishes that come on board. Yeah.
Squids.
So 2 more.
No, you just eat the squid. Anyway, we won't go there. I would never leave home without tea. Tea is it's a great thing for, I don't know, for contemplation and for giving you hope as well. So if you very cold at night, or you want to just have some attachment with normal life, then it's actually really nice kind of boiling the kettle and having a cup of tea from time to time when the shit really hits the fan. I think in this race it will probably be impractical to make a cup of tea, if I'm honest. I think the jet boil will be moving around so much.
Put it in a hot water bottle.
Otherwise you just burn yourself.
Yeah.
you get beyond a certain stage where you just can't use the stove anymore. And I heard that actually on the 50, the multi 50s, they can't really cook because the boat is moving. The motion is so bad, it's not actually feasible to cook, so you end up just eating cold food. Yeah.
iPod for the night to overcome the noise or anything like that?
No, I've tried taking iPods on small wet boats in the past, and they don't last very long. I would say that I always take a sleeping bag. I don't get anywhere without a sleeping bag. A lot of people say they just sleep in their clothes, but I don't know. I quite like actually getting some good proper sleep, albeit if it's only 20 minutes long. That's it's also good. It's good to have a bit of comfort on board, in order that you can make it your home. In order that it's not necessarily you're not counting down the minutes to just get off the boat. You need to try and become at one with your boat, and you need to live on it, and you need to be comfortable and adapted to it. So taking a few creature comforts, tea, sleeping bag,
Hammer.
and a hammer.
A candle.
A candle. Oh yeah, one thing I always never go without in races is jokes as well. So I've got a cousin who has a really, I would say really controversial sense of humour. She really likes, she's always got jokes to tell. So I get her to write me jokes, and she puts them up and she puts one joke in every food bag each day. So I wake up in the morning and get to read these incredible jokes, like a man went into a zoo and there was only a dog. It was a Shih Tzu. That's Anna. That's an Anna joke, yeah.
That's impressive.
And no matter how miserable you are, like little jokes like that, they pick you up and they give you good motivation for the day ahead.
And what do you like more, single-handing or crude racing? I mean, you do both.
I think having a mix is really important, actually. The single-handed is much tougher, actually, and I find it's difficult to when you're starting a single-handed race. There's more anxiety. You have to be really prepared. You're going to be sleeping 3-4 hours in 24 if you're lucky. So it's much more of a personal endurance challenge than fully crewed sailing. But fully crewed is a great change because you're there sharing an incredible experience with someone else. So you really build that relationship. You never stop learning from others. It's really good to have people on the boat, sometimes with more experience than you, having different people as well and mixing around, and that's when you really accelerate your learning curve. So no, I really like the mix. The last race we did, the Round Britain race, we had 4 of us on board, and it was really good fun, actually. The only issue which wasn't that good fun is I was navigator for the race, and the first 3 days I barely saw sunlight because I was just stuck down below in this dark, cramped hellhole of a nav station on a Class 40 because the tactics were just so important, and just keeping an eye on the other boats and tacking exactly the right time, exactly the right shift. It becomes so important in a crewed race because you're there really just capitalising on every little change in the weather, every scenario. So yeah, it's a totally different thing, I have to say.
Yeah.
Double-handed, you're effectively got 2 watches of single-handed racing. So you need to be able to manage the boat single-handed, whilst the other guy is down below asleep. But the difference in stress when you jump up to solo sailing, you can never really switch off. You've always got one eye open the whole time. When you wake up after 20 minutes, you're suddenly like, bang, alert. And actually, it's so nice when you go back to double-handed sailing because you can just switch off and you can say, oh, brilliant, it's not my problem anymore. How the hell, mate, about? Yeah. Oh, there's a massive line squall over there. Good luck.
Yeah. If this were a regular silver rudder with 15 to 20 knots. What would be your advice to everyone? How can you sort of be successful in a solo race like this around a coastal course? I mean, you're not going to do a lot of navigation down below, I guess.
No, so I think the preparation on the navigation is really important. So you've got in your head literally everything mapped out of what the wind is doing at what corner, what part of the course, where are the big dangers on the course. And I think a chart like that is great because it gives you an overview and even highlighting and marking on the course some references. So sandbank 2 miles off the shore, or stay offshore to avoid. Notes that you can refer to really quickly, because when you're in solo mode you just have no time. So it's all about prioritising and about preparing beforehand so you can do things quickly and efficiently on board. So having a really good idea in your head on what weather you can expect and what tactics to take and what dangers to avoid is super important. And you almost like lay it out like a film in your head. You imagine yourself, okay, then we'll have to change to the J2 on this leg because the wind's picking up, and then we're going to be bearing away, going to a code 0, and having that gives you a huge level of comfort, having that preparation in your head. Often when you get into it, you realise the actual reality is sometimes very different, sometimes completely different. The forecast can change quite quickly, but when you've got Euro forecasting you, where is he? Oh, there he is. All you have to do is add about 20% onto the wind speed, and then usually it's quite accurate.
What I'm already doing all the time.
Yes, no, it's inclusive now.
We call it the VAT.
The VAT, yeah.
So how much do we have to add for tomorrow, Euro? The usual
VAT was all the time included. Now I have learned to speak about gusts, because the gusts are something what it counts. And like we went through this procedure during the mini days, and there was 20% missing all the time. So then I just realized, okay, we'll speak about dust and that's it.
Because ECMWF always underestimates the forecast. It used to, but now they've added some VAT in their forecast. You've obviously lodged so many complaints, and eventually they've listened to you. And now the global
all the oceanographers are still complaining, that 20% are missing. So they even found the procedures how to improve the forecast.
Yeah. Well, they realise eventually that we're the ones really suffering. So I'm glad they take pity on us.
Do you have any questions for Phil?
I have a question. So when you do the longer races, I mean, do you have some kind of, mental tricks to stay motivated for a long period of time? You talked about the jokes that you get in the morning. I mean, that's a good trick
and
to keep motivated. But I mean, do you have other tricks to stay motivated and alert?
It's really you're driven by the competition around you. I find it's much harder when you're doing a solo qualifying passage and you just have to finish a certain course in a certain and you just got to complete the miles without any time pressures on you. And if you're the only one out there, you feel very isolated. But once I'm in a race, you just get totally driven by the competition around you. And I actually find I kind of get almost more motivated during the race because you really get your teeth into the event. And you're looking at everyone around you, and if someone takes a mile out of you behind you, then then you've got to respond, you've got to react, and you get pretty pissed off, and you've got to go out there and work really hard. And I think what I quite like doing with a really long course is just breaking it into milestones. So the TJV is a long course that we did last November.
That's a race from France to
the Transat Jacques Vabre. Sorry. France to Salvador. You go past the Canaries, so that's really the first big milestone, is to get down to Canaries. We've even got a smaller one. You've got to get to Finisterre, Canaries, Cap Verde, Doldrums, and then you've got the final 20% to Salvador. And breaking it up like that is really useful mentally, because you get to the Canaries and you think, wow, brilliant. I'm nearly halfway. And I quite like not looking at the distance to go to the finish ever. You just look at the distance. You plan your next part of the strategy. It's I mean, the weather these days is getting pretty good for 5 days forecasts. It's usually pretty accurate. Not all the time. But it means that
what are you referring to?
I'm referring to that the forecast that you gave me before the Transat.
Which one?
Which forecast?
trial version. You got the beat.
The one with a really nice forecast of like force 4 to 5, and then I ended up having to sail through a storm. Does that ring any bells?
That's Bakerley or?
Transat Bakerley, yeah.
Yeah.
But actually, there was nothing in the forecast that said that we had a storm coming, and the forecast changed from being force 5, gusting 6 potentially to this unforecast depression coming right down the Atlantic and smacking us. And it just shows that you can't ever rely or trust the forecast. Just use it as a guide. And then if you're so that is really good for your shorter term. That's why it's good to break the race into milestones. So you have a general longer term strategy based on probability, and then you can get a much more precise forecast for 3-4 days, maybe 5 days, and that gives you like a really good milestone. But you've got to give yourself some objectives in terms of positions. So you have some setbacks every now and again. You might screw up on a certain tactic. You might be pushed back from 1st to 5th. Mentally that's very difficult to deal with at that time. But I think because of it, it's difficult because you start imagining yourself at the end of the race. You've got to really concentrate on the here and the now. If you start thinking about too much, imagining yourself not on the podium at the end of the race, how on earth am I going to get back to the front? Then that's when it becomes mentally very difficult. So you've got to try and set yourself milestones and do the best with the tools you have available. Really,
The hammer, for instance.
the hammer, getting the hammer down.
And would you ever
Would you ever consider sailing around Fume in a class 40? Would that even be possible?
Yeah, it would be possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Draft is 3.5.
But you might stop occasionally for a few hours, maybe 6 hours, a tidal cycle. But yeah, you've got 3 meter draft keel, 3 meters keel.
There was a class for you that
Yeah.
The red.
and the red was it?
Yeah.
I think Aquilaria, wasn't it? Aquilaria or
No,
Cito?
that's from the British.
Owen Clark?
Owen Clark, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think probably the most difficult bit will be in the channel here, attacking up the channel, and you definitely need something on deck. An iPad on deck, giving you the heads up on the nav, rather than going down below.
If you ever did that, would you then do your normal approach and use weather routing for this kind of practice?
I wouldn't really use weather routing because the distances between the marks are too small, really.
Okay.
And you'd literally be going. It's very localized, so I would be responding really to the local shifts more than a predefined weather routing strategy, which may not be so accurate. It's good to know. It's good to have an idea of what the wind pattern is doing. So if it's backing, it's veering, whether you have a front passage and some features coming through. Those are really important things, and it might affect your leg if you've got a 15 or 20 mile leg, then and there's a front coming, then maybe you'll go and look for the front and then tack on the front because you've got a shift. So things like that would affect your strategy. But then the timing is not that precise of the weather relative to a small course. So you'd really have to have in your head, yes, I know there's a front coming in the next hour, and then respond to the local weather conditions that you have. So it's good to keep your head out of the boat rather than following a predefined routing on a smaller, more coastal race like this. And then often, in the summer months, when it's warm, not now, but when you've got real thermal effects, then really it's all about playing the local sea breezes and the different patterns you'll have as a result of thermal effects. It's very important. And I don't think you wouldn't really get any accurate models, would you, Euro, predicting that on an island this small? Would you, or I mean, would you say would an arome actually be even vaguely useful? A arome model?
Well, basically, you are just following. You must recognize the pattern. So like the land breeze, sea breeze, and then basically you build your mental model according to the weather situation. So basically, the most important thing is to read the weather pattern. And then, okay, you say, okay, it's a sea breeze, it's a land breeze, it's a channeling effect, it's, I don't know, there's squalls or so on, and then to adapt to those. So basically, routing is really not useful. So the models are here just as a guidance, and you have to really respond yourself.
Yeah.
Would you sleep on a course like Silver Runner, 134 miles?
That's what I'm afraid of. It's not having that ability. Well, I think you wouldn't have that much time to get comfortable.
And how do you get off duty if you're out single-handling anyway? I mean, do you wait until you are wasted and you cannot do anything else than sleep, or do you start sleeping when you do the route du Rhum in November? Are you going to sleep in the first day, 24 hours?
Well, that's a very good question. If you like respond just to your needs, and if you just sleep when you get super tired, it's already too late. You're already too fatigued, and when you then actually get some rest, you'll wake up probably feeling awful, and you might not even be in a conscious enough state to make like rational decisions. I did actually in the Dream Cup. I did a day where I didn't sleep much in the day, and then I had 20 minutes at night. And I woke up, I had no idea where I was. It took me a while to realise I was on a boat offshore, and you know, your head is just totally out of it. And then I realised like I needed more sleep. I think I checked for visually for traffic, which is really important. Checked the AIS on the chart, and I was so tired I just didn't set my alarm when I went back to sleep.
Ooh.
And then I slept for an hour, which I was lucky. I could have slept for a lot more than an hour. And those are the sort of and that was just an example of the fact I was already too tired, and it was almost a danger going to sleep. It's basically like equivalent of you doing some serious processing on a PC and then just pulling out the plug. It's bad. It's really bad for your head. It's not healthy, and God knows what damage it does. So you've actually got to plan a sleep cycle so you're sleeping consistently around the clock. Because bear in mind, you're only sleeping for 20 minutes maximum. On a race like this, probably maybe less, because there's a lot of hazards. What is the maximum time people have slept for in this race? What is the normal time?
Yeah. Difficult. I mean, people have done it in less than 20, but most of them 30, 35 hours, depending on the weather a lot. But there have been people spending 44 hours at sea.
Without any sleep?
No, I think...
50
Ask Jure.
49.
From sleep to sleep, it was 52.
Wow.
No, 64.
No sleep.
64?
Yeah. I went to bed 9 o'clock in the evening.
You had no nap or something in between?
You must have had
I had on the boat. Yeah.
Yeah.
I slept for 10 minutes.
Okay.
And up checking 10 minutes, up checking 10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes. Okay.
Maybe.
But you had the autopilot.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I had. But it was.
So you haven't really done Silver Rudder if you had an autopilot?
No. But you can't only use it when it's calm.
Yeah.
So during the night and during the day when it was no wind, but during the day you couldn't sleep because it was really warm last year.
Not tomorrow without autopilot?
No.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Without autopilot?
Yeah, but most people do it without.
Yeah, without.
Yeah. And most people are not.
On the 80s.
But it's almost impossible to stay awake for 48 hours without actually nodding off. Has anyone done that?
Yeah, Jure.
Apart from Jure, obviously.
No, I was just
Jure,
told
you
by
just
one doctor saying that every night without sleep it's like drinking 7 whiskeys. Yeah. So that basically it's like you would drink a lot of whiskey. So just like would you sit in your car after drinking 7 whiskeys? Probably not.
No.